It's the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast with your hosts, the Wolf and Action Jackson, who are keeping rock alive by talking classic rock, hard rock, progressive rock, heavy metal, 80s music, early MTV, UK vs. US chart success, and much more. This is the home of classic album and live concert reviews and your place for interviews with artists and legends. You're rocking with the Wolf. Hey out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to episode number 225 of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf, and I will be joined, as always, by my partner in crime from the East Coast of the United States of America, Mr. Gary Action Jackson. And we do appreciate all who've tuned in lately. Had a great fun run here to start off the year. Episode 224 was on Aerosmith's Toys in the Attic as it turns 50. With big hits Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion on it. It is their biggest and best-selling album ever, and one that we really love, and we're happy to go track by track on the show. And as you all know, we are huge Led Zeppelin fans and worshipers at the altar of Jimmy Page. And years ago, when they said they were working on a Led Zeppelin movie, we got excited. We just didn't know it was going to take so very, very long to put together. But finally, Becoming Led Zeppelin has made its way to theaters. I remember weeks ago, it was at IMAX, but it was in limited locations. We decided to wait until we saw it on the regular screen before we would do a review of it. Then we kind of lost track of it, and we wanted to catch it before it went away. So I kind of implored Jackson, let's go ahead and do this right now, get it done. Only problem was Jackson was traveling to San Antonio, and they weren't showing it anywhere in San Antonio at the time. It had already moved out. So not only did Jackson fly to San Antonio for business, but he jumped in a car and drove an hour to Austin, where there was a theater showing it. That's the kind of dedication Action Jackson has to this show and to you listeners out there. He goes way out of his way just to make sure that you have his input on this very cool documentary, Becoming Led Zeppelin. And it shows them growing up. It shows them finding their way into music and the music business. It shows them finding their way to each other and how they made their first two albums. It's not a complete career retrospective. It really ends at Royal Albert Hall in 1970. After Led Zeppelin 2 was a pretty big hit in America, they come home to the UK for triumphant shows at Royal Albert Hall. So whether you're old-timers like us who love Led Zeppelin and will watch anything about them, or you're someone who is young, not as familiar with them, because your generation isn't quite into rock the same way, and Led Zeppelin isn't held in as high esteem by your generation because you kind of missed out on it. I think the story is very compelling, and the sound is great, and the videos that they found and have cleaned up look and sound great as well. It's compelling to watch these legends, the three surviving members, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, and John Paul Jones, sitting down and talking about their experiences growing up as children, then becoming young men, chasing their musical dreams, and then eventually forming what would be Led Zeppelin and putting together some of the greatest rock music ever. And the fact that there's an unearthed John Bonham interview that no one had ever heard before that allows him to speak in his own voice during this time makes it pretty special. Not only for us, but you see in the movie that the surviving members are pretty psyched to be able to hear Bonzo's voice in an interview that they had not heard before. And I'm sure it'll be on streaming and on DVD before the end of the year. So while hopefully if you hear this and you want to run out and see it, you still can in your town. If you can't, I know that before the end of the year, you'll have your chance. But before we get into the movie, we do have a little bit of business to take care of. As always, we like to mention we're proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network, a family of over 100 shows. You can learn more at pantheonpodcast.com or follow on socials at Pantheon Pods. And we have to give a shout out to our amazing sponsor based in the UK, rarevinyl.com. With over 250,000 items in stock, you record collectors out there owe it to yourselves to get to rarevinyl.com, where they have mint first editions of some of the biggest albums of all time. In fact, not that long ago, they had a copy of Led Zeppelin 1 with the rare blue lettering on top. Went for over 2,000 quid. They have a lot of amazing Zeppelin stuff, but they have stuff from all over the world, all genres, all forms. And the beautiful part is they've given us a code UGLY, UGLY, that when you use that at checkout, you can save 10% off one entire order. Not just one item, but one entire order. So if you want to go find those old Yardbirds records that had Jimmy on it, do that. Go buy everything in the Zeppelin catalog. Go buy tour programs. Go buy hard to find rare singles from different territories that they didn't love to put out. Go buy some of the cool Japanese stuff. Whatever it is. Buy the box sets. Buy whatever they have. Use code UGLY, save 10%. Don't just buy one thing, buy a lot of things. Save a big 10%, not a small 10%. Your record collection will thank you. Now back to Becoming Led Zeppelin. I think it's great that they're starting to make movies about these bands that we love. And it's amazing that it ends basically 55 years ago. It's not the whole Zeppelin story, but it's compelling the way they told it as children growing up, learning about music, learning about America, starting to get into the business in any way they can, and then finding each other to help create some of the real greatest rock music of all time. And yes, Jackson and I are huge fans, so it should be no surprise that we wanted to share our thoughts on this film with you all. So let's jump into it, guys. We're reviewing the movie Becoming Led Zeppelin here on The Wolf. So, when Becoming Led Zeppelin was announced, we got all excited. We're like, hey, a feature Led Zeppelin movie. This is going to be great. And then I think it came out like February 7th on the IMAX in pretty limited release. And I'm like, IMAX is neat and all. It's one thing if you're like going into a volcano or down into the depths of the sea. But I'm like, for a rock band with a bunch of interviews, yes, they had some cool performances on there, no doubt about it. But I'm like, is that really necessary? So I'm like, let's bide our time. And then I realized, okay, it's been over a month and the thing's not going to run forever. So we better get in there and go see it. Well, I saw it here in Louisville. The She-Wolf was supposed to be out of town. So, I was just going to take the Wolf Cub. And then at the last second, she had to kind of cancel her trip. And so I'm like, okay, well, do you want to come with us? She's like, oh, yeah, I'll come. I'm like, she's not going to want to come. Here's the funny thing. We get there. It's not real packed. First of all, it's finally like pretty nice outside. It's warm. It's sunny. So it's not like winter time. And so people aren't just laying around, hey, let's just go to the movies. So we get there in plenty of time. And it's one of those places that has like 16 or 18 or 20, theaters. Some of them are kind of small. The pimply-faced kid who let us in, he's like, okay, it's number 13. It's right down here. So I'm like, all right. I get the kids some popcorn. We get some drinks or whatever. Go down there. And we get into the movie theater, and there's nobody else in there. I'm like, okay, great. We've got it to ourselves. This is going to be awesome. And we sit in there, and she's kind of, hopping around. I got the place to ourselves. Yay, hopping around. And then I realized, you know what? They're not showing any previews. There's no music in here or anything. I don't know about this. So then I go back to Pimply Face. I'm like, are you sure about it being in 13? He goes, well, let me just check. Oh, it's in number 12 right next to it. I'm not Jerry Gallo. I'm Jerry Callo. Callo. So I'm like, oh, okay. So then I'm going to walk all the way back down. We get in there, and there's only like 6 people in there once we're in there. Of course, the Wolf Cub's like, Daddy, I'm the youngest person in here. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, well, but honey, there's like 7 people in here, and I'm the second youngest person. So what's it, just relax. And then we kind of get into it. I think I'm glad that they didn't do like a theatrical release like Bohemian Rhapsody with Queen.
Oh, like a not reimagining, but like a dramatic storytelling. Yeah.
Right. Instead of what they did here, basically taking them from children, talking about how they grew up and their influences and how they made it to London and all that kind of stuff. And then just building the band from nothing and then having it kind of blow up around Led Zeppelin 2 when they get to Royal Albert Hall in 1970. Because as we know and have discussed on this show many times, Zeppelin was much more of a U.S. phenomenon than it was a UK phenomenon. And they kind of show that, like, Robert couldn't wait to get to the U.S. and you get there and it's actually pretty great. But it doesn't matter. You always want to do well at home.
That's what it seemed like. Yeah, there were some times where it was like, yeah, it's they go on the first big tour of the United States, and then they come back like, what just happened? Like, there's no, it hadn't even come out yet, I don't think, in the UK. So yeah, there was always that, man, success is great, but it really needs to be at home. to really validate them.
Well, yeah, and we would be the same way. If we were huge in Europe, but we couldn't
Right.
catch a break in the U.S., we would be bummed. I mean, we'd be glad somebody likes us, but we'd still be like, hey, we've got to get to the U.S. and do something good. So basically, the show starts with each of the three surviving members, Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and John Paul Jones, sitting in like these gothic chairs, in a big room, making comments about the different stuff. And then, of course, they cut to a picture of John Bonham, and it says John Bonham rarely did interviews, and he died in 1980 at the age of 32. But here's like an unearthed, never heard before interview with John Bonham. Now, that is pretty cool. I mean, obviously, in this day of YouTube and everybody finds everything and they kind of pop it up there or whatever, I'm kind of surprised that it lasted this long underground. Like, nobody ever let this go. Nobody ever called up, whomever, Rolling Stone, Enemy, anybody, and be like, hey, I've got this rare John Bonham footage,
Yeah. And it seemed like it was cool because they had enough of it so they could intersperse it through the whole movie. It wasn't just, 2 minutes or something at the beginning and that was it. So that, and it was also really cool because it looked like they were playing it for the other guys when they were sitting there. So to see them hear his comments was pretty cool also. It seemed like it really kind of hit them.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, in a good place. But it's just like that nostalgic to hear his voice again.
Right, yeah. And obviously they hadn't heard it, I don't think, before this sit down either. I mean, maybe Jimmy had heard some of it to say like, okay, that's good enough for us to use or whatever. But yeah, they were really sitting down there going, hey, there's Bonzo again. Yeah. There he is. And I got a feeling, it didn't say exactly when the interview took place, but it sounded to me like it took place in the early to mid 70s versus like the latter day 70s kind of thing.
He sounded young and he sounded excited, and they were only talking about the beginning of the band, so there was plenty of material there. It wasn't, after the fact or way later in the history of the band. So it really fit in well. It was really like he was part of this thing also.
Yeah. No, absolutely, because you kept hearing his voice throughout, which is great. And I loved seeing all of them as like little kids because I hadn't really seen all those before. And that's what's cool, because you knew when this was coming out, like, I know some of the footage I know they're going to show. They're going to show Jimmy as like a 12-year-old going on TV with those incredibly baggy pants.
Playing the skiffle.
Yeah, playing his little skiffle group or whatever, saying, I want to do biological research. I'm like, no, you don't. You want to be a rock god. Stop it. But to see a baby Plant and to see a little John Paul Jones, and I got to say, I feel like I learned the most about John Paul Jones in this movie as far as of the four guys, who did you learn more from? It's got to be JPJ. A, because I never really knew anything about his childhood. And B, it's rare that he gets equal time as the other two. Right? And I found him to be funny. Very dry, very English, but funny. Yep. Just talking about his childhood, talking about his dad, John Baldwin, who was, a musician in his own right and a piano player and all that kind of stuff. And a guy who was proud of John for, becoming a session musician and doing string arrangements and working on To Sir with Love and, doing the bass on Goldfinger with Jimmy as session guitar, musicians.
I can't say that I remember that story. But when they were, the fact that they were both there, that's pretty cool. You play on Goldfinger, but yeah, you're right. I think out of all of them, he was the one I knew the least about, because you're right. Every other time, it's like, oh, and John Paul Jones is here too. Hey, okay, moving on to the next thing.
Here's Robert Plant, being witty, winking at the girls. Here's Jimmy trying to get the story exactly right. I feel like Jimmy's trying to be the encyclopedia. He's like, I remember it all vividly. This is exactly what happened. Whereas Robert's trying to have some fun, maybe add to the mythology a little bit, but Jimmy's more like the archaeologist now, like, see, I've unearthed this, and this is exactly how this fits in here, Whereas John Paul Jones, he talks funny. We go on tour, and he did tell a story about having to go on tour to America, maybe their first, on Christmas Eve. And they basically found out about it on Christmas Eve or something like that, like on the 23rd, like, yes, you're going to America. We're going tomorrow. Tomorrow's Christmas Eve. Yeah, you better pack up, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's going to be cold there.
And to realize how early everyone but Jimmy got married and had families. Like Plant started dating Maureen when he was a teenager. They had kids early. Obviously, John Bonham was the same way. You know, I think he was married as a teenager, and it was great to hear that his wife was like, "You stay away from that Planty. He's a disaster." You know? Because they would get arrested or they get in trouble and kicked out of places. And obviously, John Paul Jones may have been a little older than those two. And Mo, as he calls his wife, they're still together all these years later.
That's the kind of guy. That's what he really kind of came through as to me, as just this rock of a dude who you could always count on. He didn't really seem like he ever got that crazy. But he did mention about how, I mean, the family came over for a little while. Maybe if you were in New York or something like that. But I mean, the rest of the tour, like that's it. Like you're not hauling them around the rest of the United States.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was so very separate back then, and it would take forever to get from one place to another. So yeah, people want to go to New York or something like that. Maybe they want to go to Florida to get a little vacation in the sun in, but they don't want to be in Kansas or something like that. They they just want to hit the big bits on the edges, not so much the stuff in the middle.
But it was interesting to go back to the beginning to see them as kids, and then to hear each one of them talk about how what their influences were. They were kind of the same, but they were kind of a little bit different also. It was just, but they all had that same bug. Like they got bit by wanting to be a musician, and then the journey about how they got there. I was really happy they didn't have anybody else in the movie. It was just the three of them and the Bonham interview. They didn't have, anybody's wife, anybody's ex-wife.
They didn't have people from other bands or whatever saying, they were a huge influence. Yeah, we don't need that, right?
Yeah. And as much as I love Jason Bonham, we don't really need you talking about, well, when I was a kid, Dad took me out to, like, we've already heard that. It was just the three of them. I also like the fact, I don't know what you call that interview style, but like where you don't hear the question, the interviewer at all. So it's like they're really kind of talking to you. You're not listening in on a conversation. And I think they did a good job with kind of cutting in and out between the interview pieces and then the actual live footage or the footage of the band.
Yes.
Which I don't know if they cleaned it up or what, but it sounded incredible.
It sounded great, and some of it was stuff that we knew, like when they're doing Dazed and Confused, and Jimmy's got the Telecaster that Jeff Beck gave him, and then he painted, and he's using the bow, and he's got the really long hair. We've seen that before. What was that, in Copenhagen or something like that? It was someplace in Europe.
It looks like a little theater or something, and there's people kind of like sitting around, and they don't know what to make of any of this. They're kind of just like, okay,
yeah,
and what's happening?
Yeah, and it took a long time to make this, obviously. The director's name is a guy named Bernard MacMahon, an Irish-British filmmaker he was known for this one picture called American Epic, where he kind of went through into like 1920s America and found like old blues guys or old folk people, the folks who really were the first one to kind of put this music onto phonographs, right?
Okay.
And he kind of went, and it was a documentary, just like this one. He kind of just went through everything and just, the cultural impact, the social impact, the technological impact, all that kind of stuff. And Jimmy has said, like, over the years, I have turned down dozens, if not hundreds of proposals. It's like, this is how we're going to do a Led Zeppelin movie. And he's like, no, we're not. No, that's not it. No. And because he is the keeper of the Zeppelin flame and he guards it. I mean, it's one thing if it's like, yes, I'm going to clean all this up in the early 90s. And then, okay, middle 90s. Okay, I'm going to clean up the rest of it and give that to you. And then eventually, all right, I'm going to do these remasters so it's ready for the new kind of mixes. And I'm even going to give you the demos so you can see kind of where it came from. There's not really any music left to give. There probably are some live shows out there that they could be cleaned up or whatever. But there's nothing left to give. However, they unearthed that Bonham interview and they unearthed the Bath Festival.
Okay, yeah.
Remember, they're kind of on the side there and they're kind of zooming in on Jimmy. No one had seen that. I remember a couple years ago that came out as big news, like, hey, we found and unearthed and cleaned up this like 50 minutes of Led Zeppelin at the Bath Festival in, what was that, 69 or 70 or something like that.
Yeah, it was because they were talking about the moon landing at about that same time.
You're right. It was 69. Summer of 69. They're in Bath there. And they have a stage there with a cover on it because, like, you never know what can happen. London, or it's not London. I've been to Bath. It's west of London.
Yeah.
Ancient place. They've uncovered Roman baths there. And I think that's why it's been called Bath all this time, because it had these Roman baths there. But my Latin teacher would have been proud of me, Mr. Ayler, to go and see these ancient Roman baths there and take pictures and stuff. Not realizing at the time, because that was 2020, I think, when I went there. It would be a couple years before they said, hey, we've unearthed this stuff. And it did look really good.
Yeah.
So that's great that when they endeavor to take something like this on, that they can unearth and find stuff that we haven't seen, because Zeppelin didn't do a lot of press. Peter Grant didn't like it. The boys didn't necessarily like it. And as Jimmy talked about there, like when I was with the Yardbirds, I'd seen how doing singles and, oh, you got to get the next single out. Oh, you're only as good as your last single kind of thing can ruin the band from the inside out. So it's like, we're not going to be a single band. The FM stations are starting to play not only album-oriented stuff, but they'll play the whole side of an album. They'll play like 19, 20 minutes of an album. This is where I think the kids who are younger than us, and especially the ones who are much younger than us, just don't get it. They don't understand how big AM was, because you got that big megawatt. You could send that over so much land. And that's where the big pop hits were. But then this new FM thing, which you'd find in cities and really only covers about the space of a city or so. The DJs, no program directors, no huge corporations owning them and saying you only play these 112 songs or whatever it is. And it's probably not even that many. They could play whatever they wanted. Disc jockeys were totally free to do what they wanted. And so they would play the second to last track on side 2 of albums. They would play an entire side of an album. And with people like Pink Floyd and The Who developing these rock opera and, things that would be all one kind of statement, then that gave them there's no natural place to stop anyway, so I'm just going to play you this 18 and a half minutes of this album, so that's how the technology and broadcasting changed, and Zeppelin, they were ready for it. They were right there, ready to grab a hold and take advantage of it.
And I think that's why, as much as I knew Page was kind of a genius as far as putting the music together, he really knew what he was doing as far as putting the band together and then putting the music together and then marketing that music. Because he you're right, he knew that he didn't want to be a singles band. This had to be an album or nothing. And the fact that we're going to skip ahead a little bit here, but when they went to New York, he and Grant, with the first record, it was completed. And he knew it. He knew he had to have a complete record to give to Atlantic and say, you either want it or you don't. And if the answer is yes, you can't mess with it and you can't put out singles.
Yeah, that was also fascinating. And obviously, even though this is their first record, they're not industry rookies. At least certainly not Peter Grant, Jimmy Page, or John Paul Jones. Plant and Bonham had some success. They were kind of from the north and were in smaller bands. But it shows a lot of savvy and business knowledge to know, look, if we just go to a record company and say, look, we got Jimmy Page, we got this amazing singer, you should hear our drummer, JPJ's a total pro, you should sign us. And they'll be like, yeah, okay, we'll sign you to a deal where you get 30% after we recoup all your expenses for making the thing. So Jimmy knows this. He's got a little money left over from the Yardbirds. They can go out and tour and make a little money, which they can use to then create the album. And Peter Grant's probably got a little bit of his own, right? So they finance this thing, they put it together, and then they go to the record companies and say, you have a much more power that way, right? It's like, I've already got something done. If you want to distribute it, great, but you can't tell us what to play.
Right.
And when we do new records, you're not going to do that either.
Right.
We'll give you the record and then you can put it out. And you don't do singles and all that kind of stuff. And they're talking about Jerry Wexler, but ultimately it was Ahmet Ertegun, if you're talking about Atlantic, who greenlit it. And Peter Grant did that amazing deal, like, you got to pay for the packaging kind of and we're not paying any of that. You got to pay all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty savvy. And it reminds me also of, like, when, who else could do that? You kind of have to be veteran to do that. Ozzy Osbourne did that when he left Black Sabbath. Sharon had financed the production of Blizzard of Oz. And then they went to the record companies. Do you want this? Oh, no, this music's over. Do you want this? No, it's over. And then finally they found the guy at CBS who's like, this is great, dude. I can't wait to put this out, kind of thing. And so that's just, it's a little bit of a tidbit. Those couple of things are tidbits into the business of rock music that Zeppelin was savvy enough to take advantage of, and boy, did they ever.
Yeah, and like we were talking about, I knew part of that, but they really kind of honed in on that on Page's his focus and what he knew he had to do to make this thing successful.
Yeah.
Back up here for just a second. You were talking about everybody was successful. I didn't realize that Robert Plant really wasn't successful. He had a little bit of a run, then it kind of dried up for him. So he really needs to thank your friend and mine, Mr. Terry Reid, for the recommendation. Because he said he was living in a car.
I'm George Capitanalis. This is my good brother, Terry Reid.
Right.
And you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
In London, right.
Yeah, he was skint.
Yeah.
He was trying to make it, but and of course he had studied to become an accountant. And that was going to be his lot in life. And that's a good steady job. You can earn income your whole life that way, but it's not what he wanted. And hearing that blues music from America, or even from Elvis, they're like, wow, America, the land of milk and honey, where there's sunshine and there's surf and there's girls. I can't wait to get there, right? So yeah, he was struggling, no doubt. And I couldn't wait to tell the Wolf Cub that, because they're showing Jimmy, he talks about, he's a studio musician. He'd been in a couple of little bands helping them out. And then Jeff's like, do you want to come with me in the Yardbirds? And he's like, oh yeah, I want to do that for sure, And then Jeff doesn't last long once Jimmy's there, and so he bumps out. So there's footage of him playing in the Yardbirds. And I see there's this real clear picture of Jimmy playing, and Jim McCarty, who has been a guest on Ugly American Werewolf in London, is sitting behind him. And like, that's cool. I'm like, look, Wolf Cub, I've interviewed that drummer right there. Really, Daddy? That's cool, And then it's not too long later where Jimmy's trying to put this band together, and he wants Terry Reid. And there's a lot of Mickey Most in this picture at the very beginning, right?
I didn't realize that he and Grant were kind of in it together, or they were. I think they shared an office. But yeah, Mickey, he's got his name intertwined with this story quite a bit.
Definitely, and I know exactly where his blue plaque is in London, because it's in St. John's Wood. It's not that far from the high street, and I used to walk by it going to the park all the time. I'm like, there's Mickey Most. I'll probably put a picture up on it when we market this on the social medias. And then not too long later, like, here's Terry Reid. I'm like, well, see, look at that. Within 5 minutes, 2 guests of the Ugly American Werewolf in London have been on the show. Jimmy, John Paul Jones, you're next. Yeah, just seeing them kind of come together is like, okay, the Yardbirds fall apart once they get to like LA or whatever. They're done. But they've been doing it together for like 6 or 7 years. They've been through different guitar players. Paul Samuel Smith was in the band, and then he left. Wasn't it? He was on bass. Drea was on guitar. And then then Jimmy came in as a bass player. Right. Until Drea got caught up on the bass. Like, I'm not moving to bass, you're moving to bass. I'll do it until you figure it out. And then Drea was the bass player, and then they had Jimmy and Jeff on guitar, and then they just had Jimmy. And he's like, I moved it into a more psychedelic thing. And that you see the old footage of him doing Heart Full of Soul, and some of the Over, Under, Sideways Down, and some of that stuff. Making it a little more psychedelic, but they're just a 4-piece at that point. And eventually they kind of like, okay, this is enough. We're going to end. Jimmy, last man standing, Peter Grant is their manager, owns the name The Yardbirds. So when they go out, they bill themselves as the New Yardbirds because Led Zeppelin's a weird name and Americans aren't going to get it, right? So they kind of start out as the New Yardbirds as they put this new material together. But he was already doing Dazed and Confused in the Yardbirds before they broke up and then kind of reformed themselves. So it was something that Jimmy had already been kind of monkeying with.
I was going to say it was cool in those live shots to see him actually play the guitar with the bow, like for real, not the goofy stage deal he was doing in the Firm videos.
No, and that's exactly what I was about to comment on. Was like the Wolf Cub had never seen that before. He's playing it with a bow. I say, yep. He's like, that's really cool. I'm like, you're damn right it is. It's about the coolest thing in the whole world.
Yeah, just to see him there and using that Telecaster more. Like there's one show where he's got it and he's got his hand behind the nut of the guitar and you can kind of use that as like a makeshift whammy bar. I'm like, this guy's really good at playing this thing. Like you knew that, but to actually see him play it, it's just a whole nother facet of appreciating the music.
I know, and we did see Jimmy with a Les Paul at some point, but the black and white Dan Electro made an appearance in this movie. And I immediately thought of you. I'm like, see, he always loved that thing. He's been playing that since day one in this band, since day zero. He loves that thing.
Although if you want to talk about guitar pornography, when he was talking about when he first got his, couple of steady gigs and he bought the Black Beauty, and there's a picture of him with it, the 3 pickup Les Paul custom with the tremolo on it. Holy crap, was that cool?
I know. I'm looking at that. I'm like, oh, Jackson's going to lose his mind. And like, does the switch have 3? Is there a top, middle, and bottom switch up there?
I think it's a 3 position, so it's got to be all in the middle, and then probably the front 2, or the front and the bridge and
and then the neck,
the middle, and then the neck and the. So you could. It's not like a 5-way like a Stratocaster. I think it's either all or 2 and 2. I would imagine.
Oh, I see. Okay. Interesting.
I don't think you can isolate the 3 of them with that switch unless it does more than I think it does.
Well, maybe we ought to figure that out. We could have Jimmy on to talk about that, maybe.
I'd really like to know why the 3 pickups, because most Les Pauls have 2. There are 3. Why would you do what's the advantage of having the 3 other than it looks cool as hell?
Yeah, and then Ace kind of famously had humbucker pickups on his guitar, but only one of them was plugged in. It looked amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just seeing how John Baldwin, JPJ's father, was this piano player, and that's kind of how he started, and they would be gigging out at night or traveling or whatever, and I don't know, it's just like a little kid who wants to do what his dad's doing, If your dad's playing golf, then you want to go play golf with him, If he's building something in the yard, you want to go build something in the yard with him. If he's playing piano till midnight, then, you're going to want to hang around and learn the chords, and I don't know if they say enough about his multi-talents. I mean, they talk about arranging strings and doing stuff to Sir with Love, which he points out was a big hit in America. Yeah, it's Sidney Poitier, man. I mean, it was a big deal in America. Also featured a very young Michael DeBar in the picture, and Lulu was in the picture, and they talked about doing arrangements and recording on Lulu songs, who was a really big deal in Great Britain, not so much in America, but just a huge deal at the time. So just seeing, and to see the interview as like a teenage Jimmy Page talking about like when famous people come in, they aren't worth a shit, like it. You think it's so cool. Oh, I'm recording with so-and-so today. And then they get in there and they're total jerks, or, they don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to give anyone the time of day. And Jimmy was like, kind of a wise teenager sitting there with a smile on his face. Like, yeah, famous people, they aren't worth a damn, kind of thing. But to be a professional musician as a teenager and have all the old timers in there being like, okay, this kid can actually do what he's supposed to do here. He had respect at a pretty young age. And then he had a house on the Thames when he's like, I don't know, 21 years old or something like that. He has this super long hair and a house on the Thames. I'm like, do you know what a house on the Thames costs? No 21. Maybe if you're a professional footballer, but no 21-year-old can afford that now.
I like the fact that they pointed out about, both Jones and Page were professional musicians. The fact that you had to get it right in a room full of musicians, you did not want to be the person who screwed it up and they had to stop. So I think that translated into the band later. These guys were really, really good. Like Bonham was great at playing the drums, but he was kind of, wild man. And Plant was the hippy dippy, let's love and peace. But these two dudes, they knew how to go into the studio and pound it out professionally. The other thing that I thought was really cool was Jones talking about like he always wanted to be a bass player. Like it wasn't like oh yeah, I started on the guitar and they needed a bass player, so I did.
So I moved.
That was always kind of his mentality. And you were talking about his dad, oh, why do you want to play the bass for? And then he's, oh, because I love it. And he started, and the dad was like, okay, this could work out. Here, just watch my hand, and you just follow along with it. And that's how he got into the groove. And he said that like what did he say? He was in love with John Bonham's right foot, and he just kind of go along, and then he'd drop out and let him play a little bit, and then come back in again. I'm like, God.
So cool.
So good. So
I
cool.
know.
And really, when you watch some of the live stuff, Bonham is really playing along with Jimmy Page. And Jones, even though he's doing the bass stuff, he's kind of doing his own thing, locking the groove in. And just to watch the four of them go at it, unbelievable professionalism.
Now, I think that the other three, especially Bonham and then Plant, were kind of in awe of Jimmy because he's from London. He's the big city. He's just a tad older. He's played on all these records, played on Goldfinger, but he really could sit down and write songs like, look, this is what I've got. And he would show it to them. And then they would all build the song off what Jimmy had created in his head. I want to go back to John Paul Jones, though, because you mentioned his dad. He's like, Dad, I want to play the bass. Like, no, don't play the bass. That's like a fad. That's going to go away. You don't want to do that. Learn the saxophone. You'll always have work, kind of thing. He's like, no, I still want to do the bass, But he had already been pretty good at the piano. He became a church organist and choirmaster at 14 years old.
Yeah.
He's talking about how we had this killer minister or whatever. So he was a cool guy. He was a young guy. He did fun sermons and stuff like that. So I wasn't very religious. But this guy made it fun, and then I would go to church, and then I figured out the hymns, and I learned all them, and then I could improvise a little bit on the organ, and I'm like, that's when he's 14. What were we doing at 14? Absolutely nothing,
Yeah.
I got my first CD player at 14. Then I thought I was really into music. He's a choir master at 14. Crazy good stuff. Yeah. And then, that story about, okay, you are picking something here. Just watch my left hand. And he's watching his dad play like that. And then he starts to really pick it up. I'm kind of sorry that we didn't get into more of his musicianship. I know he was basically just the bass player on those first two albums. Maybe you could put a little piano in somewhere. But obviously, if there was another movie, it's like, okay, let's just pick it up here in 1970 from Royal Albert Hall and run till, I don't know, you want to run to 73 through Houses of the Holy in Madison Square Garden. Do you want to run through Physical Graffiti? Whatever you want to do, it would show him contributing so much more to the band than just the bass.
Right. Now that's an interesting segue because I was thinking about that. I'm watching the movie, but I'm also kind of watching the time, thinking to myself, like, how far is this going to go? And then they wrap it up in 1970. And then I said to myself, I would totally be excited for a part two of this. Just keep it going, just because they got to be, the first part would be the beginning. Then the second part would be how it just absolutely went nuclear with the next albums and how they grew and everything just got more and more bigger. But then also you'd have to put in the part about how it started to get out of control too. So I don't know, but I would love to see a part two.
I think they should have a part 2 and a part 3, to be honest with you. And I think that Bernard MacMahon, he made several in the series. There's like it was American Epic, The Big Bang, then American Epic, Blood and Soil, then American Epic, Out of the Many, the One, and then there's the American Epic Sessions. And they all came out the same year. It's not like he did these, 1 year after the other. So he has the ability to create the story and then continue the story. And so, obviously I can't get enough Led Zeppelin. And as fascinating as this movie was, and as fun as it was to see some of this old footage that we hadn't seen and the stuff that they cleaned up, and to hear John Bonham's voice, and to hear how funny John Paul Jones could be, like, that's great. But the world really changed
Yeah.
in like 71, 72, 73 for them. So back to the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, it makes sense that they end at Live Aid, even though they embellished a little bit. Freddie didn't really know he had AIDS until 1986, a year later or whatever, and he lived until 1991.
Mm-hmm.
And then they did do some things afterwards with him. It made sense to end it there.
Right.
It didn't. I mean, look, if the movie's becoming Led Zeppelin, you're showing them how they grew up, what their own personal roots were. How did they get into music? What was the American influence? That kind of thing. How did they get to be Led Zeppelin? Creating the first album, touring America hard, coming back for a little bit of jubilation at Royal Albert Hall on their home soil. It's like, okay, hey, look, we made it, yay. But they hadn't made it the way they were going to.
Right. Right.
And that's what I would really like. They really ought to do 1970 to 1975 or something like that. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
It almost kind of seemed to be like maybe they were, because why would you? There's so much more of the story to tell. You know, this was kind of just like a, just kind of whet your appetite and then we'll get into it. But I'm glad that they did it this way, only because if you try to put everything into one movie, you would have glossed over a lot of the beginning part.
Well, no, that's absolutely true. And even some in the middle part, because everyone wants to know the backstory. Everyone wants to see them as kids. Everyone wants to hear that 14-year-old choirmaster story. But then once they start to get in the records, okay, well, then people kind of know there's a lot of history that has been told about Led Zeppelin, right? So it's like, we kind of already know this. And when they talk about they go to Olympic Studios and they're working with Glenn Johns and stuff like that, that's kind of the old school way to do it. But it's once they start in Led Zeppelin 3 and 4, then they're going to Headley Grange. They're going out in the country to find these spots where they can kind of get away. And like, is there any kind of lost footage of that? Do we have lots of still pics from that time that would make to help the story visually be told?
What was that one that they had? I don't remember what the show was, but it was all still pictures. It was later on, almost kind of near the end. And the way they put it together with the music, they did a great job of getting you to feel like you were there without actually having live footage.
Yeah, see, they can do that. And because they were so well photographed and they hit it big fast, not to mention they weren't nobodies.
Right.
People in the business knew who Jimmy Page was, So there were photographers around. So, is there any stuff of Ian Stewart jamming with them for Boogie with Stu, which was, I've already forgotten which session that was from, but that was one of the first 4, maybe 5 albums. That would be amazing to see, even if they don't have any video of it, just to see the stills of them together playing. Would be so cool.
And if there was any kind of like leftover tracks from them in the studio, just talking to each other, like, okay, we're going to do this on this beat, or, whatever, just behind the scenes stuff from those sessions would be awesome.
Well, and they could really go into the songs. I feel like they did a pretty good, job of like talking about communication breakdown and how many more times and stuff like that. And especially when he got to Led Zeppelin 2 and Jimmy's like, I'm going to create a soundscape, so it all kind of blends together. There isn't necessarily hard stopping points. And, you can kind of move from one song to the other. So you could get American DJs to play a whole side. Yeah. Boogie with Stu was from the 71 Headley Grange Led Zeppelin 4 sessions, so they could go a little more in depth on, okay, well now on this, when we got to Led Zeppelin 3, we wanted to open up a little bit. Yes, do some blues, but then also do some acoustic stuff and do some hard rock stuff like the Immigrant Song kind of explained that. Hearing their explanation of Zeppelin 4 would be amazing. And then honestly, kind of right into Houses of the Holy, I think would be 2.
Okay, so that would be 2, the second part, and then third would be Physical Graffiti to the end.
That would probably make sense. However, because they used so many bits from those other sessions on Physical Graffiti, I feel like Physical Graffiti would be a good stopping point.
Okay.
And then for the third part, they could come and say, okay, then they did the tour for Physical Graffiti. Then the next year they do the movie, The Song Remains the Same, comes out in 76 along with Presence. And then other bad stuff starts to happen, like the car accidents and the death of Carrick and all that kind of stuff. And then Jimmy and John Bonham not being all together for In Through the Outdoor. Then Jimmy's like, okay, that's it. I'm getting my stuff back together. We're going to, put this together. They do the tour of Germany, and then Bonzo dies, and then it's over. and they can really talk about why it's over. Like our buddy Mick Wall says, it wasn't over just because John Bonham died. It was over because they were spent as a unit.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of both. They didn't really want to go on without John Bonham. But the fact of the matter is, unlike a lot of bands, they were filthy rich. I mean, really, really wealthy. Thanks to the sweet deal with Atlantic Records and them selling 100 million records or whatever it is. Not to mention Peter Grant had negotiated them getting 90% of the take of the gates for their shows, and then they played stadiums and arenas all throughout. They basically didn't tour in 74 or 76 or 78 or 79 for that matter, because they just didn't need to. They just didn't need to. They had plenty of money. They were rolling around in it. Another band who didn't have that money would have carried on. It might have taken them a little while, but they were like, look, we don't have a choice.
You would have picked up another drummer. You would have gone into the 80s now. And that's why I'm really glad they didn't, because here's the Led Zeppelin album from 1983. Like, ugh, what is this? They would have gotten left behind, with the kind of the other classic rock acts, or they would have changed things up and it would have been strange. So I'm sad that Bonham died, but I'm glad that they decided that was when they were when they were done with the whole thing.
And they were smart to do that. The other thing is, too, Jackson, in the third one, you could do a little bit on the posthumous Led Zeppelin. Like, we tried to do Live Aid, but it was a disaster, and Phil Collins sucked. And they will just throw him under the bus for that. And lately, Phil's been throwing them under the bus. Like, it wasn't my fault. They came out and they screwed up. And he's like, they totally throw him under the bus for that. They could talk about how the Atlantic thing, it was just too late. We all got wasted and it took too long. And Nebworth was good, but it was only 3 songs. And then Jimmy and Robert did their thing. They could do half of a movie if they're just doing Presence, Song Remains the Same, all the bad stuff from 77, 78, and then In Through the Outdoor, and then the final tour. They would have plenty of time left to kind of comment on some of those things. Now, they don't necessarily need to do that, and they might even skip it all and go straight to Celebration Day, which wouldn't hurt my feelings either.
Well, so that's the thing too. Like, you can't talk about the In Through the Outdoor sessions. You definitely can't talk about Live Aid without pointing out the fact that Jimmy was in rough shape. And does he really want to go back through that? Probably not.
He doesn't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even think he wants to talk about In Through the Outdoor because of that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. But, you're talking about the posthumous stuff. They could have stuff from the Kennedy Center. I love that when they were sitting there and then Hart comes on to do Stairway and they realize that Jason's playing the drums.
And Robert Plant's crying. He's crying like a little girl. But I mean, obviously this wouldn't work for every band. Who else do you think it could work for? I mean, you could do the Stones up until what? Up until Satisfaction? No, it's got to go past that. Up until 71 through the Alan Klein years? I don't know.
The only problem with the Stones is that they don't have the same backstory. Like, they're just kids who listened to records and put this thing together and became huge. To me, Zeppelin was more like they all 3 of them had a distinct story, or actually all 4 of them had a distinct story, and how they came together to form this thing. It probably couldn't happen. It couldn't have happened with any other 4 guys. It was just that mixture of all of them. I understand Page he had his hand on the whole thing. Could he have gotten some other guys? Maybe, but it wouldn't have been the same.
No, and I love the fact that it was Mo who told John Paul Jones, hey, Jimmy's putting a band together. You should call him. No. Very English. No. I couldn't do that. I was like, I really think you should call him. And then he calls him up. Hey, Jimmy, it's me. You need a bass player? It's like, actually, I do.
I do, yeah.
God, one of the most fortuitous phone calls in the history of the world, certainly for him.
Well, and you figure, too, like I said, all of it had to come together correctly to have somebody like Jones in the band who has this massive amount of talent, but is not like, we have to do it this way, or I'm getting my feelings hurt because I'm not writing these songs, or I'm not getting the credit. He was the perfect dude to accompany them to do what he needed to do. And then, like you said, you get the later albums where he kind of gets to blossom out and play other instruments. It was just perfect. Like the whole thing was just perfect.
It's just perfect. And of course, again, this is about taking advantage of opportunities when they present themselves to you. Mm-hmm. He was doing well as a session musician. He had enough to pay for his wife. They're already having children. And the old timers who were session musicians, like, yeah, I'm going to leave this and I'm going to go be in a band. They're like, you're crazy. Yeah. That's nuts. You don't make the money. You're on the road all the time. You're going to be skint. You're going to be away from your family. That's just nuts. Only a fool would do that. And, percentage-wise, playing the odds, they're right.
Right. Correct.
But you got to take that chance. I mean, no one could envision that Led Zeppelin would be knocking the Beatles off of the charts, right? And becoming the biggest thing that America had ever seen. They're like, no. You just come in here 9 to 4, you catch the train home, you live your quiet life, out in the country, and you just come in here and work, man. It doesn't get any better. Yes, it does. And it doesn't always happen. It's not for everyone, but you got to take that chance. And thank God he did.
Yeah. I was thinking about that when they were talking about the first tour they did with Vanilla Fudge. And it was cool to see a young Carmine.
I know. But piece. He's a piece, right?
Okay, that's right. He's a piece.
Vinny's Appice and Carmine's a piece. Yeah.
Got it. I'm sure they thought the same thing. They thought Vanilla Fudge would be the biggest band that ever lived, and it just didn't happen. And the same thing with the Yardbirds. They were huge, and that didn't work out. So you're right. The odds of them making it as a band were astronomical.
Yeah, and even if they are good for 2 or 3 years, you have a good run there. There was no such thing as 30-year-old rock stars. So it's like, okay, what's going to happen is the boys are going to go out there, they're going to have some fun, and then they're going to meet a girl, they're going to want to get married, and the girls will be like, you're not doing this touring the country all day thing. You're going to be home with me. We're going to have kids, that kind of thing. It's just what happens. The Beatles never thought they'd last more than a couple of years. It was just not something you did as a career. Back then. It just wasn't. There was one Beatles, but no one else was like, oh yeah, I'll just be in this band for 10 or 12 years. Right. No, that doesn't happen. Bands don't last that long. They just didn't. There wasn't enough money in it. You didn't get paid anything to be on the road. Hardly. If you sold millions of records, you could get paid from that. Whereas today, you don't get made any money from your records, really. Yeah, you have to go on the road.
Yeah, completely the other way around.
And it's $250 a ticket, whereas back then it was £1.25 or something like that.
And they were talking about too, like they would be doing these shows, and they would have to do the pressers, and then they would get the crowds to show up because they may have had part of the album on the radio, but it wasn't like the tour was sold out. Like they were just kind of going town to town and hoping that they sold enough tickets.
Yeah, and usually in a package too, you'd have like 3 or 4 bands, and maybe you're on the top, or maybe you're second from the top, or something like that. Yeah, and everything changed, and they were ready for it, and just kind of took advantage of that, and boom, it's like Apple computers being ready for microchip production in America to come in line with this need for a personal computer, and then boom. This is Led Zeppelin taking advantage of their opportunity, the change in culture, the change in technology. I give a lot of credit to Jimmy Page. I'm sure Peter Grant had something to do with it too, but I just feel like Peter believed in Jimmy. And when Jimmy decided, okay, this is the direction we're going to go, Peter would be like, right, okay, this is how we're doing it. You lot, this is my band. You're going to pay them this. You're not going to do this to them. And then Jimmy could be the happy creative type. And then Peter Grant could be the bull in the china shop. Like, this is exactly what's happening. You don't like it. We'll go someplace else.
Yeah.
But can you imagine that? Like, you're the other guys, like Jimmy and Peter are going to America to see if they can get a deal. Gee, I hope that works out.
Yeah.
I hope he comes back.
Right. Kind of yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Like, it couldn't have happened with anybody else, but yeah, I would have been a little apprehensive there because that was going to the other side of the earth to maybe sign this deal with this company. Yeah, I hope it works out. It just kind of you couldn't call or text or anything like, hey, yeah, the meeting went great. Like you had to wait till they got back to you.
Back basically.
Right. Correct.
Like, okay, I got it.
Either it worked, or now it was a bust.
Right. Yeah, I know. And if you're Robert Plant, you're really counting on that.
Hi, this is Jim McCarthy of the Yardbirds, and you're listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London.
Well, but I like doing these movies when they come out. You know, we did the Tom Petty, the Heartbreaker Beach Party last year, and that's now available on Paramount Plus. I'm sure that once this Becoming Led Zeppelin finishes its run, that A, will get a DVD release later this year, and B, I'm sure it'll be on some of these streaming services at some point there. But I mean, I would encourage everybody to go see it while you can. I know that it's still this week. It's still available. It might already be gone by the time we put the show out, at least in some markets, but it will come back. I mean, anything Led Zeppelin related, they're not going to bury it. It's going to be released on DVD. It's going to be released on streaming so you can see it at home. If you're our age, I feel like you have to see it, our age or older. But if you're younger and you don't really know about Led Zeppelin because classic rock radio's only played you 8 different songs of theirs and you don't really understand who they are and the power they had, I would definitely go see this movie.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting movie, even if you're not a huge Led Zeppelin fan. Just the story itself of these 4 dudes who came together and put this music out that is still huge today. And I was standing there thinking to myself, I mean, we just did this show on Physical Graffiti that's 50 years old.
And that's 5 years away from the end of this movie, right?
But yet now, you know, you still have that interest in the story because it's so great. Yeah, absolutely go and see it. It sounds amazing. The quality of the I guess restoration,
the audio is just fantastic. Yeah.
There's that one scene where they're playing a Whole Lot of Love. It looks, I don't know what it is. It looks like an amphitheater or something. And the people there, like there's this one little kid with his fingers in his ears. And I just made a note. I'm like, that kid's got a hell of a story because he didn't know what he was doing at the time, but he can say, yeah, I saw Led Zeppelin play wherever that was in 1968. And I thought everybody's head, like they're stunned. Like if people are just like, I don't know what this is.
I don't know what this is. Yeah, that's the thing. So they're in like a little bowl and they are filming it for whatever reason.
Right.
And yeah, there's older people there. There's people there with little kids. Some of them are dressed kind of well. It's like, we're going to play some music for you this afternoon kind of thing. And they come out and you know, there's no such thing as a metalhead back then.
Right.
There's, you know, there may have been long hairs, but there weren't any in the crowd.
No.
And, you know, now they probably dine out on that. Like, yeah, I saw Led Zeppelin play Whole Lot of Love for the first time in England, or, you know, whatever that was. But yeah, they're sitting there covering their ears like, what is this? This isn't the Hollies. You know, whatever they were expecting, this wasn't it. And they were really going for it. And Robert's really giving it to him, you know, and Jimmy's out there just strutting around being Jimmy, just loud as he can be. It's funny. I mean, I guarantee you all those people who hated it that day, years later, they brag about that so much.
No, I knew it was going to be big. Really? Because you look like you wanted to.
Hated it.
Yeah.
It looked like you wanted to throw stuff at them if you could get anything in your hands, you know. Yeah, that's something they don't talk much about because they would just book bands. You know, you got a stage, you got a town hall, you got a dance floor, whatever it is, just book the band and then, you know, you hope people show up and maybe you make a killing or maybe you lose your lunch. But it just seems like that's something that happened back in the day. From what our buddy Farmer John talked about in the 60s, like music was exploding so quickly. There's so many different bands and different genres, different things. People couldn't catch up with it. They're just like, okay, yeah, you've got guitars. Fine. We'll book you here. Fine. We'll record you. And so you play a lot of odd places. Now it's like you have specific hard rock clubs, metal clubs, jazz clubs, pop clubs, dance clubs, all that kind of stuff. They're not the same. But back then it's like, you've got seats. Okay, then we'll book this rock band and we'll have an oompa trumpet band there the next day. You know, it's just crazy how the music world was changing so quickly. You just kind of had to take what you could get.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a story. It just doesn't happen like that anymore. Because like you said, everything is segmented now. You know exactly what you're getting. They have specific clubs for stuff. So even if you don't know the band, you know what it's going to be because they're playing at this certain place.
Right.
Yeah. Or with another band that you know.
So the legacy of Led Zeppelin is so strong that they can end 55 years ago and it'll still be relevant. It'll still be fascinating. Just think about that. Like, if we're in the 80s, are we going to watch a movie about a band that ended in 1935? I mean,
No.
Probably not. No.
No.
I mean, even if it was about Robert Johnson, you probably couldn't hold our attention for a whole movie because there is no video footage of him. That's for sure. There's only 1 or 3 or something like that pictures of the man, and there's a lot of mystery around him. So yeah, Led Zeppelin, still a force to be reckoned with. And this is this our 4th Jimmy Page related show of the year? And it's not even the end of the first quarter yet, so obviously they had a profound effect on us.
Yeah. I'm glad they put it out. I was excited when they announced it, because like you said, there have been other projects that were proposed, and the fact that Page was on board, you knew this was going to be pretty good, because he does not give his seal of approval to many things.
And congratulations to you. You drove it out. I mean, you had to fly for hours, and then you just jumped in the car and drove an hour to go watch it, because I gave you kind of at the last second, like, well, we got to do this before it's gone.
Right.
And you're like, okay.
Well, I mean, but my thing was, I said okay because I figured, hell, San Antonio is a big city. There's a lot of movie theaters. This is a cool rock town. They must be playing it. They're not. Son of a gun. I'm just glad Austin wasn't farther away.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. That was me and Jackson talking about Becoming Led Zeppelin, the documentary film, which is available in IMAX, now available in theaters, but probably coming to an end of its run. It's just great to see the old footage. It's great to hear them playing live and to hear in their own voices, including John Bonham's, what it was like growing up, what they were trying to accomplish in life, what it was like when the 4 of them finally got together. The business stuff is always interesting. The business of music has always fascinated me. And while most of it is stories about artists getting ripped off one way or the other, this one was really one of triumph. Led Zeppelin had a fantastic record deal and an even better touring deal thanks to Peter Grant. And that helped them maintain their success and also kind of made it possible for them to never have to get back together. So we didn't see them struggling to compete with techno in the 80s. And while grunge was killing off all the bands that followed them, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant were doing a reunion tour of sorts, just the 2 of them, going out and doing Unleaded, making a lot of money doing very successful tours. And then into the 2000s, when rock was pretty dead for a little while there, they come back with Celebration Day, the last time they really played together. This may chronicle their beginnings, but honestly, it's only whetted our appetite to see more. And obviously, we spent a little time on the show talking about how we would do the subsequent 2nd and 3rd Zeppelin documentary shows. It must be something they're thinking about, especially since they've seen what a strong reaction people have had to becoming Led Zeppelin. The fact of the matter is, you can't just make this about any band. It has to be somebody huge. And I was thinking about it, another band that'd be possible to do this with would be Aerosmith, if only for the fact that all 5 members are still alive, and there is footage of them from over the years. Contemporaries of Led Zeppelin, yeah, and friends. But for the 2 of us, for me and Jackson, and for a lot of people of our generation, no one can really eclipse Zeppelin's mystique and catalog. And yeah, the fact that they didn't put out a bunch of crap in the 80s and 90s or beyond is why all that music is still so amazing to this day. And if you're a young person who doesn't know Zeppelin very well because rock radio has ruined them for multiple generations, just go check this out. I think you'll find the story compelling. I think you'll like the music. Maybe do some more discovering of your own into their catalog to see how special Zeppelin really were. And we want to know, folks, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? You email us. You let us know. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. You can let us know bands, albums, tours, concerts, DVDs, books, rock properties you want to hear us talk about here on the show. If you're enjoying yourself, we ask 2 things. 1, make sure you subscribe and download anywhere you're getting your podcast so you don't miss an episode, and those downloads are key measures to help us grow the show. Also, please go out and give us a 5-star review. It doesn't take but a few minutes. It means the world to us. It helps us find more rockers like you, and if you send it our way, we might just read it here on an episode. Thanks as always to Pantheon Podcast for making us part of the family. And thanks to our sponsor, RareVinyl.com, who has all sorts of amazing Led Zeppelin stuff in their catalog, folks. You can use the code UGLY to save 10% off not just one item, but one entire order of all the Led Zeppelin stuff your heart desires. That's it for episode 225. A lot of great albums, a lot of great guests coming up here shortly. So you gotta stay tuned. And to all you rockers all around the world, be cool and keep doing what you do to keep rock alive.